Today's gospel is a miracle story. There's different kinds, there's healing miracles, there's food-based miracles. I like those. But this one's a nature miracle. Jesus takes the disciples in a boat, decides to go across the sea to minister to the Gentiles that live over there. And we can recall a few weeks ago, Jesus was ministering in his hometown, when his mother and brothers came to chain him up. So now he's leaving to try to bring his teachings to the non-Jewish people, the non-believers, the Gentiles who live on the other side of the water. And then they get a massive storm, and the boat is tossed to and fro, and the disciples get very nervous, very scared, but Jesus sleeps. "Do you not care that we are perishing?" they ask. And then he says, "Peace, be still," and the storm stops. And then another very famous question: "Why are you afraid? Have you no faith?" This story is full of wonderful questions. The disciples are experienced fishermen in this gospel. So if they are afraid of the storm, you know that it must be a serious one. Throughout this ordeal, Jesus is the picture of serenity. Now, don't you think that would be quite frustrating for them? And even for us? I think so. The theologian Feem Perkins points out that humans now can be a lot like the disciples then. She states that disciples accuse Jesus of not caring because as human beings we expect others to share our panic and distress. If they seem detached from the situation, we accuse them of not caring about our suffering. Jesus is asleep during the storm. How much more detached could he seem to be? Now, sometimes, when someone is really calm and you're upset, right, it makes you panic more than you were before. I get frustrated often. I'm a worrier. If there was a Girl Scout badge for worrying, I would have earned it by age 8. And I'll get outraged about something, and I'll run to tell Frank, my husband, about how outraged I am and how I've been wronged, and I want him to feel the same. Right? But he'll listen, and then he'll say something like, "Why are you upset about that? That's no big deal. Forget it." Or he'll agree with me, but quietly. Or he'll help me set out a plan to work through the problem, and that's not really what I wanted, right? But he'll do all of this without breaking his calm and cool demeanor, and it's so infuriating. But in the end, he's usually right, which makes it more infuriating. But Jesus knows that they're going to make it across the water safely because he knows that they're skilled sailors. And moreover, he knows that God's plan for him doesn't end at the bottom of this murky water. When we panic in our lives, we can end up dividing ourselves from people who could help us, right? We get our blinders on. We get so worried that we don't listen to reason or think things through. Panicking can also cause us to doubt God's love for us. And God's love, as we know, is the linchpin of the whole passage, but the whole Bible, really, in essence. So what is making them panic? Besides the storm. It's change, simply put. Jesus is taking his disciples on a journey. It's a new experience for them. He says, "Let's go to the other side." He doesn't ask them if they want to go to the other side. They might not have gone if he had asked them. They might have said, "Well, it's dark, it might be a storm, let's discuss it. Let's form a subcommittee and talk about when we should possibly leave on our trip." But he doesn't tell them that. He doesn't tell them that once they're over on the other side, they're going to be in a foreign land where people don't like them very much, and that they're going to encounter a demon-possessed man and then all those demons are going to be cast into pigs and run off a cliff. If he had told them that, they probably would have stayed home. Because people like comfort. We like familiarity. And Jesus doesn't let the disciples think about it. He just takes them and he says, we're getting in this boat. Let's go. The boat ride that's going to change their lives forever. And Jesus knew that they were going to make it across, and he knew what was waiting on the other side, and that was a grand, life-changing adventure. And if he had asked them to think it over, they probably would not have gone at all. In a book called Peace Like a River by Leif Enger, the main character says, people fear real miracles because they fear being changed. The disciples were afraid of the storm, of course, but after the storm is stilled, the text states that they are afraid. They're even more afraid. They're afraid of what they might have gotten themselves into, afraid of moving into the unknown, afraid of being changed by God, because Jesus calms the storm. And it's been pointed out to me by other theologians that when there is no wind, we have a dead calm, like it's described today by Mark. And if you have a dead calm, there's no wind to push a sail anywhere. So without the wind, the men now have to row the boat across the lake. That's not in the story, but I kind of laugh when I use my imagination a little bit here. I think of it like an interesting juxtaposition. We have the miracle they wanted the storm to stop, and Jesus demonstrates his power and stops the storm. But then we have also the hard work now that they weren't expecting. First they're struggling in the storm, and now they have to row their boat across. Probably wasn't exactly the miracle they were hoping for from Jesus, but that's what they got. And it's easy for each of us to be like the disciples and think that God doesn't care about us. Because so often God is silent to our cries and our storms in life. And it's easy for us to be stubborn at the thought of a new adventure and prefer the familiar to the unknown. And we can pray for miracles all the time that we don't seem to get. And Jesus performs a miracle here, but it's not a grand one with fireworks and loud proclamation. He simply tells the sea to be still. Jesus speaks softly to the storm and gently. And this is how I think he deals with us as well. He speaks to us softly, in a whisper. So it's easy for us to think he's not there, that he's not listening because there aren't any words, just stillness. But he is there. He's everywhere. Sometimes we don't see him the way we want. And we don't get the grand miracles that we would like. And sometimes we end up overlooking the small miracles that we do receive because we're sitting waiting for that grand one. Paul writes to the Corinthians in today's epistle. He says that they need to persevere in suffering and open wide their hearts to Jesus. They can't hear Jesus right now because they weren't listening with open hearts. We never know, the funny thing about Paul is, we never know what Paul is writing about. Because it's a letter. Usually you get a letter, you write back a letter. So we never see the other side of the letter. So we don't know what they're asking about. But they were suffering at this time through the persecution by the Romans. So maybe they're asking Paul, where's God? Where is God? Why isn't God answering us? And he says, God is there for you. You have to open your heart. It's not easy to follow Christ, to do the right thing in life. It's not easy. It's a struggle, a storm. But even in the biggest storm, there's a calm spot in the middle, the eye, where we have to open our hearts and listen. All of us have a calling from God to do something, when most of the time, honestly, we would rather stay put and do nothing. I like staying home. A boat ride? Maybe tomorrow. But the rest of the quote from that book I said earlier. People fear miracles because they fear being changed, though ignoring them will change you also. So either way, you'll be changed. So why not follow where Jesus calls? Following Jesus doesn't promise us a storm-free life or a life without any suffering. The promise of this story is that there is something on the other side of the storm that's worth getting over to. But you'll never see it if you don't step outside and go on that journey. And I think that is a great lesson to take from today's reading. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.